The silence before the storm. Ethan Cole had learned early that silence was safer than words. Each day, he moved through life as if walking a tightrope, careful to say nothing, to reveal nothing. The city outside his window pulsed with sound, laughter, anger, and fear, but he treated it all as background, as if it belonged to someone else. His own apartment was a sanctuary of muted tones, the walls absorbing the world so he would not have to. Morning light crept over the edge of his blinds, spilling across the worn carpet. Ethan brewed his coffee with meticulous precision, counting the exact seconds for water to steep, stirring slowly, deliberately, as if the motion itself could anchor him against chaos. Silence, he thought, was a shield. Words were weapons, or chains, or dangers. Better not to speak. At the corner cafe, he sat by the fogged window, watching the streets with cautious attention. People passed by in hurried lines, umbrellas jostling, footsteps tapping rhythms he almost envied. There were children with tangled hair and oversized backpacks, couples arguing in bursts of heat, the homeless shielding themselves from the drizzle with coats frayed at the edges. Ethan observed, noting patterns, predicting outcomes, but never engaging. It was a pattern he had perfected over years, seeing without intervening. Yet today, the routine fractured. A shout, sharp and jagged, echoed from the hallway across from Mrs. Rain's apartment. Ethan stiffened, recognizing the cadence of fear in that sound. He hesitated at the door, keys dangling in his hand. For a heartbeat, he imagined stepping forward, knocking back, speaking, but he didn't. He retreated, telling himself it was none of his business. The night held its own judgment. Behind thin walls, Ethan heard a crash, a thump, muffled but sharp enough to pierce his practiced detachment. He tried to imagine what he could have done, but his mind recoiled, offering excuses, rehearsing silence. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by shadows of imagined confrontations, cries he could not trace, faces blurred yet accusing. In the days that followed, he noticed the details he had once ignored. The way a neighbor struggled with groceries, how a street musician's notes were drowned out by traffic, how a mother shielded her child with trembling hands in the rain. He cataloged these fragments silently, feeling their weight press on his chest. Each ignored plea, each step away, compounded the sense of his own complicity. Ethan began to write, first in fragments, later in paragraphs. He recorded what he had seen, what he had failed to act upon, what he had chosen to overlook. The act of writing felt like breathing, a slow exhalation of guilt and acknowledgement. Words became confession, and confession, he realized, was the first step toward understanding, toward change. In the evenings, he sat by his window, listening to the city's pulse. Sirens, laughter, the scuff of feet on wet pavement, distant arguments, all formed a tapestry he had once pretended not to notice. Now, each sound carried meaning, each rhythm demanded attention. Silence was no longer a shield. It was a weight, pressing, persistent, inescapable. One night, a knock at his door startled him. It was Mrs. Rain's, eyes wide, hands trembling. She needed help, something small, something urgent. And for the first time, Ethan stepped forward, offering his presence, his words, his hands. In that moment, silence transformed, from protection into barrier, from comfort into regret. Ethan realized that the city, the people around him, the fleeting moments of distress, none of it required heroism. It required attention. It required action. Even small acts, unnoticed, could ripple outward. He did not have to save the world. He only had to step into it, fully, acknowledging his part in its unfolding story. The nights that followed were quieter, not because the city had changed, but because he had. Observation became engagement, seeing became understanding. He learned to speak softly, carefully, choosing words that carried presence, not concealment. And in the silence between conversations, he discovered reflection, empathy, and the courage to act. Ethan's life, once measured in footsteps and withheld words, expanded. He began volunteering at shelters, offering guidance to those navigating bureaucracies he had once ignored. He called neighbors when storms approached, carried groceries, lent ears to those weighed down by grief. Each act, small but deliberate, stitched him into the fabric of the world he had long watched from a distance. And yet, the weight of the past lingered. Guilt did not vanish, it transformed. It became caution, wisdom, awareness. Silence, once a friend, was now a tool. To listen, to pause, to consider before speaking. Words carried power, and he wielded them carefully, aware of their impact. Through it all, Ethan learned the most profound lesson. True courage was not loud or dramatic. It was in noticing, in responding, in acting when the world expected an action. The storm outside had not changed. The chaos persisted. But he had learned to move within it differently, no longer a passive observer, but an active participant, shaping the world through presence, compassion, and the deliberate choice to act. Rain began as a distant murmur, soft against the rooftops, yet it carried a weight that made the city feel smaller, more intimate, more fragile. Ethan watched from his window as droplets traced irregular paths down the glass, merging and splitting in patterns that seemed deliberate, as if the storm itself were alive and observing. Each patter drew a memory from the depths of his mind, a flicker of moments he had carefully buried, arguments he had avoided, friends he had ignored, promises he had left unspoken. He remembered Lucas, his childhood companion, the boy with laughter that could pierce any gloom. They had shared secrets, victories, defeats, yet a single night of misunderstanding had driven them apart. Ethan had chosen silence, allowing pride to dictate action, and the friendship had faded into absence. He wondered now if Lucas remembered it all, if the boy had grown to understand, or simply carried the hurt like a shadow in his chest. Ethan's phone buzzed, breaking the contemplation. A message from his sister, Clara. "Check on Mom. The storm's getting worse." Simple words, yet they pulled him into motion. He donned his coat, the fabric stiff from disuse, and stepped into the rain. Each step resonated, wet asphalt splashing, shoes squelching, a rhythm of life reconnecting him with the world outside his self-imposed silence. The streets were half empty, shadows moving in hurried arcs. He passed a man shaking under a shelter, hands trembling as he clutched a thin jacket around his shoulders. Ethan stopped, asking if he needed help. The man blinked, startled, then nodded. Together, they shared the space until the rain lessened, and Ethan continued, noticing how small gestures, holding an umbrella, offering a word, a glance, could matter more than grand declarations. Turning a corner, he saw a tree fallen across a narrow street, branches like skeletal hands clawing the air. Cars swerved, horns blaring. Ethan lifted a branch, just enough to allow passage for a cyclist trapped behind. The weight of the wood pressed against him, yet it was grounding, tangible, a reminder that action, no matter how minor, had consequence. Arriving at his mother's apartment, he found Clara anxiously pacing. "Mom's worried," she said. "She thinks the power will go out. We should check the emergency supplies." Ethan nodded. Together, they opened cabinets, sorted candles, flashlights, batteries. The small acts of preparation were comforting, not because they guaranteed safety, but because they demanded attention and care. Later, sitting at the kitchen table, he reflected on trust, its fragility, its necessity. How often had he assumed people would act, assume he would act? How often had he relied on silence to maintain comfort, only to discover it bred distance? Trust, he realized, was not given lightly. It was a fragile architecture built from countless choices, from deliberate attention, from consistent presence. He called Lucas, the voice on the other, and carried years of distance and unresolved tension. Ethan spoke first, hesitant yet genuine, admitting failings, confessing the quiet neglect of years. And Lucas, after a pause thick with unspoken words, responded not with accusation, but with willingness, the willingness to reconnect, to forgive, to begin anew. The storm outside mirrored the turbulence within, yet through conversation, understanding began to emerge. By evening, the rain had softened, leaving streets glistening, reflective, a mosaic of lights and shadows. Ethan walked home slowly, boots tracing puddles, each step deliberate. He had faced small acts of chaos, engaged with lives outside his own, and realized that courage existed not in grand gestures, but in presence, in willingness to act, to trust, to respond. He reached his apartment, soaked but grounded. The silence that once had been a shield now felt like an empty canvas, inviting him to fill it with action, compassion, and connection. The storm had passed, but its lesson endured. The world demanded participation, and retreating into silence was no longer an option. That night, as he lay awake, Ethan understood that storms came and went, both in weather and life. But what defined a person was not the absence of fear, but the conscious decision to act despite it. Trust, attention, courage. These were the tools to navigate any tempest, internal or external, and he intended to wield them deliberately. Ethan awoke to the soft glow of dawn filtering through his blinds. The city had changed overnight. Puddles reflected the pink streaks of morning, and the air carried the fresh, damp scent of rain-soaked asphalt. Yet inside him, a new storm was brewing, one composed not of weather, but of reflection, responsibility, and choice. He dressed slowly, savoring the ritual that had once been a shield against chaos. Now it felt like preparation, not avoidance. Each step was deliberate. Each movement counted. He knew that today, as with all days, his decisions would ripple outward, touching lives he had never imagined. The streets were busier than the night before. People emerged cautiously, still wary of slick sidewalks and stray branches. Ethan paused at the corner where the fallen tree had blocked passage. Its branches had been cleared, but the evidence of disruption remained. Scattered leaves, crushed newspaper, a single, half-deflated basketball. He bent to pick it up, rolling it gently in his hands, feeling the residue of both neglect and recovery. At the cafe, he found a small table near the window. He ordered a simple coffee, black, no sugar, and let the aroma ground him. Across the street, a group of children splashed through puddles, laughter loud and contagious. Their joy was a contrast to the careful observation he practiced, and yet he felt drawn in, almost envious of their unguarded presence. His phone vibrated, Clara again, asking if he could assist with errands. Without hesitation, he agreed. Walking through the city, Ethan began to notice more than just movement. He noticed need. A man struggling to carry groceries, a woman trying to calm a frightened dog, an elderly neighbor adjusting a loose doorknob. Each instance called for intervention, and he answered, slowly building a sense of engagement that had eluded him for years. By afternoon, he arrived at the community center where volunteers were organizing relief for those affected by the storm. Ethan joined seamlessly, carrying boxes, sorting supplies, directing families to safe zones. He recognized faces from the previous night, people he had observed but never approached. Now, interaction was inevitable and necessary. He felt the quiet satisfaction of contribution, a subtle energy replacing the habitual detachment he had cultivated. During a lull, he sat on the steps outside, watching as the sun emerged fully, casting long shadows across the wet pavement. He reflected on the choices that had brought him here. Trust, once abstract, was now tangible. It was the trust of strangers relying on him, the trust of family counting on presence, the trust of his own conscience urging action over avoidance. A sudden cry drew his attention. A child had slipped near the fountain, water splashing over tiny sneakers. Ethan reacted without thought, catching the child and ensuring she was unharmed. Her parents rushed over, gratitude etched on their faces. In that moment, Ethan understood that courage was often instantaneous, a product of awareness and willingness rather than deliberation. Evening approached, painting the city in amber and deepening shadows. Ethan walked home, boots tracing reflective puddles, heart steady yet alive. He carried the weight of choices, yes, but it was not oppressive, it was instructive. Each decision, each engagement stitched him further into the fabric of the community he had once observed from a distance. Back in his apartment, he reviewed his notes, chronicling moments of connection, small acts of trust, and personal insights. Writing, he realized, was as much an act of participation as volunteering. It demanded acknowledgement, reflection, and honesty. Each word held weight. Each sentence bridged the gap between observer and participant, between isolation and inclusion. Night fell gently. Ethan looked out at the city, illuminated by streetlights and lingering storm reflections. The rain had passed, yet its impact persisted in the renewed connections, in the streets cleared of debris, in the quiet gratitude that rippled through those he had helped. He understood that storms, literal or metaphorical, left traces, but so did human action. And in that interplay, life moved forward, shaped by courage, trust, and deliberate choice. The city had settled into a tentative calm. The rain had stopped completely, leaving behind streets that gleamed under the afternoon sun. Ethan walked slowly, feeling the residual weight of the past days, choices pressing gently against his consciousness. Each encounter, each small act of engagement, had left an imprint, both on him and on those he had touched. Passing a familiar cafe, he paused, watching patrons converse over steaming cups of coffee. He saw a young woman helping a child with homework, her patience deliberate, her encouragement steady. A man at another table offered directions to a tourist, guiding them with an openness that spoke of trust. These ordinary gestures, unnoticed by most, resonated with Ethan. They were small threads weaving the intricate tapestry of human connection. He continued toward the park, where puddles reflected the late afternoon sky. Children played along the paths, their laughter ringing like music. An elderly couple fed pigeons, sharing smiles that conveyed decades of unspoken understanding. Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude, realizing that even amid chaos, people sought to rebuild, to connect, to affirm life through action. At the far end of the park, he found Lucas waiting near a bench. The moment was quiet, almost hesitant, yet charged with the potential of reconciliation. They walked side by side, sharing stories of past mistakes and lessons learned. Ethan admitted the moments when he had chosen silence over engagement, acknowledging the distance it had created. Lucas listened, not with judgment, but with patience, offering reflections and understanding. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Ethan felt the subtle shift within himself. Trust, he realized, was a living entity nurtured through consistent action and presence. It required courage, yes, but also humility, the willingness to admit errors, to ask for help, to listen without bias. Their conversation drifted toward the broader community, the ways in which individuals could foster resilience. They spoke of neighbors helping neighbors, of small initiatives that might seem insignificant, yet had the power to transform lives. Ethan recognized that leadership was not about dominance, but about service, about amplifying the quiet strengths that existed in everyone. Evening arrived, bringing a gentle chill. Ethan walked home, the city illuminated by streetlights reflecting off damp streets. He felt the culmination of days filled with observation, intervention, and reflection. Each choice, however minute, had compounded into a network of influence, a proof of the interconnectedness of human lives. At his apartment, he sat by the window, reflecting on trust, courage, and accountability. Writing in his journal, he documented each encounter, each decision, each lesson learned. Words became anchors, preserving insights that might otherwise be lost in the flow of daily life. Night fell fully. Ethan understood, more clearly than ever, that storms were inevitable, but the response to them defined character. Trust was fragile, yet essential. Courage was not absence of fear, but the decision to act in its presence. And connection was the bridge that carried humanity across the uncertainties of existence. He closed his journal, a quiet smile forming. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new storms, and new opportunities to act. And he was ready, fully aware, fully present, and deeply committed to navigating life with attention, care, and deliberate courage. Ethan awoke to a muted morning, the city wrapped in a soft haze. The air carried a subtle dampness, hints of rain lingering in the alleys and parks. He moved deliberately through his apartment, aware that each day presented choices, unseen currents influencing the lives around him. The memory of past interactions weighed gently, a reminder that actions reverberated beyond immediate perception. He decided to walk toward the riverside, the path winding between old brick buildings and patches of greenery. Along the way, he noticed small acts of life. A barista greeting a customer with genuine warmth, a child offering a flower to a passerby, and an elderly man tending to his balcony garden. Each instance seemed ordinary, yet together they formed a subtle symphony of human resilience. Ethan felt a deep resonance, understanding that these currents, often unnoticed, shaped the texture of community. Reaching the river, he paused to observe the flow. Water moved steadily, carrying debris, leaves, and reflections of the sky. Ethan likened it to the choices people made, some deliberate, some accidental, but all affecting the broader movement of life. He imagined himself as part of this river, actions merging with others, creating a shared current that neither could fully control but could influence. A young woman approached, struggling with grocery bags. Without hesitation, Ethan offered assistance. She smiled, relief evident, and they walked together a short distance, exchanging polite conversation. The encounter was brief, yet it reinforced his understanding of trust. It was cultivated through small, deliberate gestures sustained over time. Every moment of engagement had the potential to ripple outward, shaping experiences in ways that might remain invisible. As the afternoon sun shifted, Ethan wandered through the market district. Merchants arranged their stalls, laughter and chatter filling the air. He noticed subtle exchanges, a vendor sharing extra fruit with a child, a customer patiently waiting while a clerk resolved a minor dispute. These fragments of life, easily overlooked, illustrated the power of consistent, compassionate action. Ethan recognized that leadership and influence were not always visible. They existed in the quiet, unheralded spaces where care met opportunity. He met with Clara at a small cafe, a routine now that had developed into mutual reflection and accountability. They discussed challenges, hopes, and the importance of observing the unseen currents of behavior and influence. Clara shared her own realizations, the way she had begun noticing subtleties in human interaction she previously overlooked. Their conversation flowed naturally, emphasizing that awareness was as vital as action. Evening approached, the sky painted with gradients of orange and purple. Ethan walked home slowly, reflecting on the day's lessons. Each interaction, each choice was part of an intricate network of influence. He understood that life's complexity was mirrored in the interconnectedness of people, that even small acts of kindness or attention could shape outcomes in profound, unpredictable ways. At home, he documented the day's experiences in his journal, writing with intention, capturing both the events and his reflections. The act of writing itself became a meditation, grounding him, reinforcing his understanding that mindfulness and deliberate engagement were essential to living authentically. Night fell fully, and Ethan sat by the window, gazing at the city below. Lights twinkled, shadows shifted, and he felt a profound sense of presence. The currents of life were invisible, yet they were real, powerful, and continuous. Trust, courage, and connection were not static. They ebbed and flowed like the river he had observed, shaped by countless deliberate choices, gestures, and moments of attention. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply. Tomorrow would bring new currents, new challenges, and new opportunities to navigate the intricate web of human experience. And Ethan felt ready, conscious of the responsibility embedded in each decision, committed to walking with awareness, empathy, and deliberate courage. Ethan awoke to the faint hum of the city, a subtle reminder that life continued beyond his personal reflections. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant coffee shops opening for the day. He felt a quiet determination, an awareness that the choices he made today could influence not only his own path, but the lives intersecting with his. He walked through familiar streets, observing small, often unnoticed acts. A neighbor sweeping the stoop, children helping each other carry books, a vendor patiently attending to a line of customers. Each instance resonated with Ethan, illustrating the delicate balance between intention and outcome. He understood that decisions, even when silent or invisible to others, carried weight. Arriving at the riverside, Ethan found himself reflecting on recent interactions. Conversations with Clara and Lucas had highlighted the importance of attentiveness, empathy, and consistency. He recalled moments when hesitation had led to lost opportunities and other times when courage and timely intervention had nurtured trust. The pattern was clear. Mindful engagement created ripples, unseen yet powerful, shaping the network of human connection. As he walked along the riverbank, Ethan noticed a young couple helping an elderly man navigate the uneven stones. Their gentleness, unspoken patience spoke volumes. He realized that meaningful action often required neither recognition nor reward. It existed as part of a larger, interconnected flow. Every choice mattered, even when unnoticed, forming threads that wove together the fabric of collective experience. Later, he returned to the community center, joining volunteers preparing for the evening programs. Tasks were mundane yet significant: arranging chairs, organizing materials, setting up lights. The effort required focus, collaboration, and attention to detail. Ethan observed how each participant contributed uniquely, their actions blending into a cohesive effort. The synergy underscored a fundamental truth: trust and cooperation were cultivated through repeated, conscientious engagement. During a quiet moment, Ethan stepped outside to watch the sun dip toward the horizon. The streets glowed with the golden hue of evening, casting long shadows that stretched across the pavement. He thought about the subtle decisions he had made, small gestures that had fostered understanding and strengthened relationships. Each choice, no matter how minor, contributed to the larger rhythm of life. Night fell, and Ethan returned home, the city's hum softening into a gentle lull. He opened his journal and wrote, carefully capturing reflections and insights. Writing was not merely documentation. It was a practice of mindfulness, a deliberate effort to process and internalize experiences. Trust, courage, empathy. These were living principles, active in thought and deed, requiring constant attention and reinforcement. As he prepared for sleep, Ethan felt a profound sense of continuity. The day's decisions, though quiet, had reaffirmed his commitment to mindful action. Tomorrow would present new challenges, but he now understood the enduring power of deliberate choice. Closing his eyes, he embraced the calm certainty that thoughtful engagement and compassionate action would guide him through the unseen currents of life. Night deepened over the city, stars hidden behind the gentle haze of clouds. Ethan sat by the window, the journal open before him, pen poised to capture the reflections of a day woven with subtle choices. The air was still, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked streets, and in that quiet, he felt the weight and beauty of all that had transpired. He remembered the morning's walk along the riverside, the small gestures of kindness, the patient acts that often went unnoticed. Each interaction, each decision, had accumulated into something larger than himself, forming currents that would extend far beyond his immediate perception. The invisible web of influence, he realized, was alive, persistent, and endlessly shaping the world. Ethan closed his journal and rose, stepping onto the balcony. The city stretched beneath him, lights shimmering like constellations fallen to earth. He considered the days, the weeks, the countless moments of observation, choice, and reflection. Trust, courage, and empathy had not always come easily, but they had grown through practice, reinforced in the quiet spaces where action met intention. He recalled conversations with Clara and Lucas, the exchanges that had deepened his understanding of human connection. Awareness, he now understood, was as essential as action. Observing, listening, and responding thoughtfully created ripples that could alter outcomes in unforeseen ways. Even in the absence of recognition, the act of deliberate engagement mattered profoundly. Turning from the balcony, Ethan walked through his apartment with deliberate slowness, noting the familiar objects around him. Each item held memories, reminders of choices made and lessons learned. The quiet rhythm of his steps mirrored the rhythm of the day, measured, intentional, grounded. He felt a sense of completion, not as an ending, but as a preparation for what lay ahead. He returned to his journal once more, adding final notes for the evening. The pen moved deliberately, pausing at moments, allowing reflection to settle. The act of writing itself was a meditation, reinforcing lessons of awareness, courage, and connection. It reminded him that life's currents were continuous, ever-flowing, and that each decision, no matter how small, contributed to the broader tapestry of experience. Finally, Ethan sat back and gazed at the city, the gentle hum of life beneath him. He understood that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new interactions, and new opportunities to practice mindfulness and deliberate action. The currents of trust and understanding, built over time, would continue to guide him. As the night deepened, Ethan allowed himself to rest, the weight of the day settling like a quiet certainty. He had learned that life was composed of countless small moments, each with the potential to shape the unseen currents around him. In that awareness, he found peace, courage, and readiness for whatever lay ahead. The city slept, the river flowed, and Ethan closed his eyes, embracing the continuous, subtle rhythms that connected him to the world, a final, quiet acknowledgement of the enduring power of thoughtful action, trust, and empathy. Title: